Okay. So just remember that we're still alive. Meaning, we don't think we know we're still alive, but we take it for granted. And all that means is we see it as self-existent, and that means we don't think about impermanence. So we have to, because we assume we're permanent, even though intellectually we know we're not. So we think, okay, as a result of my past virtuous karma, I'm still alive. That's the main reason. Not my youth, not my health, it's my virtuous karma. We'll talk about this. So how marvellous, but it's not finished yet. But my gas tank hasn't run out, basically. So I'm going to make the most of this precious life that I created. So the causes to receive, to get, the result of my handiwork. Not waste it. Listen to these teachings, take some tools from it to use to develop the two wings of the bird. The wisdom wing, the compassion wing. The compassion wing is the point, so you help others, but compassion is not enough, as Holiness says. You've got to have wisdom. So that's the work you do on yourself. Understanding who you are, understanding karma, understanding impermanence, understanding suffering, getting renunciation, so then we can help others. So thinking like this. This is why we're sitting here, listening to these teachings. So for those of us who are Buddhists already, we remind ourselves in the first two lines of this prayer, our reliance on the Buddha, and the second two lines are expressing this motivation, this goal we have. Sorry about the sneeze on it. Sangye charam soke chonam la jancho baru dagni kyam suchi dagi chanyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupasho Sangye charam soke chonam la jancho baru dagni kyam suchi dagi chanyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupasho Sangye charam soke chonam la jancho baru dagni kyam suchi dagi chanyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupasho. So I forget what we talked about last week. What did we talk about? Anyone remember? Last Sunday? It was karma and emptiness, I think, wasn't it? Do you remember anything in particular? Anybody? Take notes, ask, what to do. Well, the topic on the thing says karma and dependent origination. Well, karma really, I think we just did talk about this as we started. Karma is actually an example of dependent origination. Dependent arising is the term I like to use. His Holiness says it's the Buddha's slogan, dependent arising, we all hear it. And really this is the way of presenting Buddha's big picture view of how things actually exist. All of Buddha's teachings, if you study the Lam Rim, this packaging of the teachings that the Tibetans put together, and the one that we're using especially in our tradition coming from Lama Atisha in the 11th century that Lama Tsongkhapa really ran with, that's his trip, he really loves the Lam Rim. Then we can see that the teachings are all laid out in this nice, orderly way, orderly according to your capacity to internalize it, which is just like any, we'd call it a course, wouldn't we? The best word for Lam Rim, as far as I can see, is the word a course. We know, if you learn something, it's structured nicely in an orderly way, orderly in terms of your capacity to internalize it. Hardly surprising. Just surprising to us that a spiritual path is packaged in that way. And that's what the Lam Rim is. Well, all the teachings, the way it's presented, it's the Hinayana and the Mahayana, the two wings of the bird, junior school and high school. The first and second scopes of the teachings are the lower stages, the earlier stages of practice, which is where you develop the wisdom wing, as they call it. I like to call it, I refer to that a lot. And then the main part is all leading us to the Bodhisattva path, the Mahayana component. And the way all the teachings are presented, everything is leading us to the final one in the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva, the 6th perfection, the perfection of wisdom. The way the whole Lamrim is structured, everything is guiding us to finally, everything is preparing our minds to get to emptiness. Put it like that to me. So everything all the teachings are underpinned by emptiness. In all the Buddhist teachings, emptiness is assumed. And dependent arising is the conventional way of presenting emptiness. There's another way of putting it. I think just conventionally. So everything is leading us to understand this. Because why? Because that's how things are, finally. And of course, emptiness itself is actually a Hinayana teaching in its nature. You need to realize emptiness in high school. If you go on the Hinayana path, you want to get out of samsara, achieve your own liberation, then you've got to realize emptiness. So emptiness is actually taught there. But the way it's taught in the Mahayana is in the context of the 6 perfections, which is the final stages of the path to enlightenment, because it's combined with bodhicitta, which gives it the extra oomph that is said to be necessary for us to remove even the obstacles to omniscience from our minds. It's combined with bodhicitta, so it's taught as one of the perfections of a bodhisattva. So if everything in the teachings is leading us to it, and the more we hear it, the more it'll help us understand the earlier teachings. So another way of presenting, Buddha's view, all this is Buddha's view, is in terms of the 2 truths. Another way of talking, Conventional and ultimate. That's how they talk, Conventional, ultimate. And so, dependent arising is the shorthand, if you like, for a conventional reality, and emptiness is the shorthand for ultimate reality. So these words are simple words: conventional, ultimate, empty, dependent. We know these words, English words, easy enough. But of course it's packed with meaning, and not just saying the words isn't enough. It's like saying, oh yes, relativity. Aren't you clever? What's it mean? Oh, I don't know. E equals mc squared. What's it mean? I don't know. So, we've got to learn. Because this is Buddha's teaching. This is the point. Everything leads us to this. So, if we look and see the world in terms of these 2 truths, there's different ways of seeing it. One way is seeing everything in the universe that does exists in certain ways. And Buddha's whole deal is for us to see things the way they exist, which is very curious to us, because we would never think that has any bearing on my ordinary life, that I'm not in touch with reality. Doesn't make sense. But this is Buddha's point. If we hear the teachings, Buddha's teachings are about how to get rid of suffering. If we hear the 4 Noble Truths, the context there, the reference point there is suffering. That makes sense to us. Oh yeah, I get that, I'm suffering. I don't want suffering, yep, don't want to suffer, better practice Buddhism, let's say. But to get wisdom, to see how reality is, that seems a bit abstract. Seems like you've got to be a scientist to do that, But this is Buddha's point, and I've mentioned this. There's this absolute direct relationship between seeing reality and happiness, and living in ignorance and suffering. This is Buddha's particular way of talking. When we can really even hear these words and understand them, we're really on track with understanding Buddha's approach to life. Buddha's saying, essentially, every single mind, every sentient being, every mind possessor, and we're one of them, we possess a mind, and so are ants and dogs and toilets and Hitlers and spirits and hell beings. There's an awful lot of them. There's trillions upon countless trillions of mind possessors, and we're one lot of those. We're one class of them. Every mind possessor necessarily possesses the potential to become an enlightened mind, a Buddha mind. A mind, and so what that means is simply, and I mentioned this too, is it's indicated by the Tibetan word for Buddha. Sang, sangye. Sang implies the complete eradication from your mind of all the delusions, and the second syllable, gye, implies the complete development of all the good qualities. Sounds pretty simple, but this is Buddha's point. He says, in the mind, which is not physical, doesn't come from God, doesn't come from mummy, doesn't come from creator, doesn't come from brain, it's not your brain, doesn't come from nowhere. Your mind, which is this beginningless continuity of mental moments, necessarily not physical, necessarily possesses this potential to be free of all delusions and full of all the goodness. So why would you want to do that? Because, he says, all the delusions, the neuroses in the mind, are the source of suffering. As we began to talk yesterday, they have two main characteristics. One is that they're disturbing. This is pretty clear, pretty evident. You know, check the last time you were angry, jealous, depressed. Pretty clear that they're deeply disturbing, and this is the insanity we see around us. You see crazy people and shouting people and murdering people and depressed people. What's going on is their delusions in their mind are making them insane. They don't think it's their mind, they think it's someone else. We all do. We know we're feeling crazy, but we think it's your fault and his fault, and that's the worst craziness. That one itself is the worst schizophrenic craziness. They're all disturbing. But the key point Buddha makes, the key one, is why they're disturbing. Why are they causing suffering? Because they're liars. Because they're delusions. Because they're not accurate assessments of reality. So this is what Buddha's saying. And this is why we suffer. And he happens to say that these delusions, these neuroses, these misconceptions are not at the core of our being. This is mind-blowing. It's so outrageous, you know. There's not a single model of the mind in our culture that would dare assume anything remotely like it. We defend our right to have all these delusions. We actually consider that they're normal, so much so that you'd be considered unnormal, abnormal, insane if you didn't have them. So everything in our world upholds the neuroses. Buddha's so radical, we can't even hear it. He says, don't be ridiculous. You don't need them, baby. They cause you suffering. And guess what? I found a way to get rid of them. And he says they've got these two qualities. One is they really are disturbing, that's clear, but this is the point, they're lies, they're delusions, they're misconceptions. In other words, the extent to which we're caught up in anger, depression, jealousy, attachment, low self-esteem, and the rest is the extent to which we're disturbed, i.e. suffering. So, how to get rid of suffering? Get wisdom. How to get happiness? Get wisdom. This is Buddha's approach. So it's totally relevant. Therefore, so learning about the two truths, which is his way of presenting how things exist. It's his way of presenting how things exist. And what his methods are to help us get in touch with this, how things exist. Because why? Because right now we're living in La La Land. This is what he's saying. So if this is true, and if it's true the delusions are the cause of suffering, and if it's true the delusions are not at the core of my being, then hey, we should be giving Buddha $1 million a day if we met him, you know, for his marvellous methods. So, how do things exist? What is it, and how come, and how is it that these delusions function to cause us not to see how things exist, and how does that cause suffering? And how are they adventitious? How are they, how can they, these delusions, be removed from the mind? Which is a brand new idea to us. We don't need to be told that they're at the core of our being. We believe it every day. We uphold our right to be attached, angry, jealous, depressed, and low self-esteem every day. We believe it as the absolute truth every day. Our psychology model has just reinforced it. Well, guess why? Who created our models of psychology? People like you and me, who believe that they're negative. So naturally, you know, we assume it, we just reinforce our own nonsense. So it's pretty outrageous, excuse me, to hear what Buddha says, you know. Okay, the two truths. How do things exist? Well, the very first thing we have to do, okay, what's really helpful is this. This is showing the absolute centrality of the mind in Buddha's teachings. When you look at the, you study Buddhist philosophy, I did a little bit, not much, you learn the different synonyms for that which exists, which is a big point because we're trying to get in touch with what exists. There's various synonyms for that which exists. Phenomenon, objective knowledge, established base. And there's about 6, but I can't remember 4. And the 4th one is existent, the noun, and existent. And the definition of an existent, this is so tasty, is that which can be cognized by mind. So it's axiomatic. That which exists is necessarily that which can be cognized by mind. And clearly there's ways of defining what cognition is, and is it a valid cognition and all this. You get your nuts and bolts really clear. And by definition, that which is cognized by mind, determines that which exists. So existence is defined by cognition. Existence is defined by the way the mind cognizes. There's not something out there from its own side made by God that's mysterious, that's how we think. Or not something out there waiting to be found by the scientists that's out there self-existent, unknown, hidden under rocks that we have to find. Not like that. Existence is defined by cognition. Very tasty point. So, we better know what cognition means, what is a valid cognition, how do you define it, how do you determine it. Then we have to define what the mind is that does the cognizing, and then we have to define what the objects are that are what mind cognizes. These things, so to be all clear. So we can then discuss what exists, so we can then discuss how they exist validly. And then we can see the disconnect between the way we cognize them, mistakenly, wrong cognition, which is really not cognition at all, and see the disconnect between the way we see things and how things exist. This is what we're trying to do as a Buddhist. Getting this way of understanding things. And when we talk like this, we're really on track. We're getting in touch with the very way he talks. So one way of presenting all this is this two truths, conventional, ultimate. So as Lord Buddha says in the Heart Sutra, well actually Lord Buddha's sitting there in meditation and he's channeling his teachings through the mouth of Shariputra and Avalokitesvara, who are sitting there having a conversation. Apparently there's different ways that Buddha taught in the sutras, and this is one way. He kind of sits there in meditation and they kind of, he must influence their minds and they start talking his words. So that's one of these. So there he is sitting there. I always remember this, when you read all these sutras, they all talk about, many, many bodhisattvas and people are all there and you feel like big crowds of people. And if you've been to Varanasi, to Rajgir, you know that Vulture Peak, where he taught the Heart Sutra and many others, is like a little kind of, postage stamp size hill. It's miniature. Half a dozen people can squeeze up there. So I asked Geshe Dagpa in San Francisco, we studied with Geshe Dagpa in San Francisco. I asked him, where do they all sit? He said, oh, in the sky. So when the Buddha was teaching and he was sitting there, Shariputra and Avalokitesvara as a 10th level bodhisattva, not in the Sambhogakaya form, were having a chat, and Buddha's sitting there spacing out in meditation, or he's not spacing out. And the Heart Sutra comes out. It's all about the heart. Heart Sutra is the main Mahayana Sutra in the Perfection and Wisdom. It's the shortest version, and it's about emptiness, about how things exist, So he says in there that we have to repeatedly investigate how all phenomena that do exist. And in the Heart Sutra, they're just simply laying out all the categories of phenomena according to the way Buddha sees things, like the Four Noble Truths and the 5 aggregates and not the 6 perfections, the 12 links, the 18, the 6 senses, the 6 objects of the senses, the 6 sense bases, the 18, whatever they call them. These different ways simply the different ways of breaking down the universe. There's this way of describing the universe, obviously quite different from the way we describe the universe in our scientific terms. And we have to look at each one of these repeatedly to see how they are empty of existing or empty, as he says. He says the shorthand, he says empty. And then the other point he makes, the very beginning point, the really crucial one, is that he says form, and that's why why he says form is the first one, because it's the first category of things, which is the 5 aggregates. And the first of the 5 aggregates, which is simply a way that Buddha divides a person into 5 different pieces, The first one is form, which means body. So he says form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness. And emptiness is nothing other than form. And then he says we have to look at all the other phenomena, just like this. Same thing. So what's that mean? Well, it tells us something extremely tasty. And it's pointing to the two truths. Technically speaking, it's a wrong statement. Form is emptiness. But what it means is that where there is something that exists, and form is an example, it's just body, where there is a phenomenon that does exist, which we first have to establish existing. We'll do that. We have to establish how something exists, and there's very clear ways of how you establish how something exists first, before you can begin to discuss it wherever there is something that does exist, its being empty of inherent existence exists on that. Emptiness of inherent existence is a characteristic of that which exists. So what that tells us instantly, immediately, is that there can't be nihilism, because it's one of the biggest. When we hear the two truths, we make these two huge mistakes. They're the two extreme views, as Buddha says. So the minute we hear ultimate, a cup, or eye, or the pillar, or a carpet, whatever does exist conventionally, as soon as we hear it is empty, that's the shorthand, meaning empty of existing from its own side, which we'll talk about. As soon as we hear it is empty, we go, there's no cup, there's no eye, there's no pillar, and we sort of launch into the nihilistic view, we chuck the baby out with the bathwater. And emotionally, we do that when we get depressed. You think about it. It's like nihilism. It's like nothing. I'm worthless. I'm nothing. I'm nobody. I might as well kill myself. Emotionally, we can see that's the consequence of the view of there is nothing. That's the one extreme view. And this is the worst, the most cause of most suffering. The worst for suffering. But we run to that like a magnet. This view. I am nothing. It is nothing. There is nothing. There is no point. I always quote this, but in 2010, I remember Newsweek recently, an article, in 2010, the last year they've got numbers. It blows my mind every time I say it. 680,000 people on Earth were killed by unnatural means, terrorism, war, violence, whatever. 680,000. 880,000 people died by suicide. That's nihilism. You think, there is nothing. I am nothing. I am worthless. This is the emotional consequence of the instinctive view of there is nothing. It's a philosophical position, but we don't think we have a philosophical position. No one taught us nihilism as a philosophy. We just believe it instinctively. Person who has real confidence in karma, they don't kill themselves. Person who has real faith in God, they don't kill themselves. Who kills themselves? People who think there's nothing. And that's the materialist philosophy. You think about it. And it's a lie. It's a stinking, rotten, lousy lie, Buddha says. Things don't exist like that. And just speaking philosophically, it's an absurdity. There can't be such a thing as nothing. In the way we think, there's just nothing. Like a big black hole. And I mentioned before, the depressing aspect, the depression aspect of that. The emotional component of having that view in the mind. Because where would the idea I am nothing come from? And the feeling, as we call it a feeling, it comes from it's a view. That's surprising to us. We don't think we've got a philosophy. I didn't go to philosophy school. I don't have a philosophy. But every word we speak is an expression of our philosophy. And that philosophy, this is one aspect of the samsaric philosophy. We live it spontaneously. I'm nothing. And it's a lie. Buddha says it's just technically not correct. And that's the mistake when we hear the philosophy of emptiness, that's what we impose on it. This is now speaking philosophically. I was talking in daily life before. We just have it intuitively. We mishear it. We can't hear it properly. And then as soon as we hear the other truth, conventional truth, that there is an eye, there is a pillar, there is a cup, a dependent arising eye, a dependent arising cup, we go, oh, thank God there's something, and grasp. That's the other extreme view. That's not true either. That's an over-exaggeration. This one's an under-exaggeration. And we go like drunken sailors between these two a trillion times a day. Spontaneously. Why? Because they're the view we have programmed in our mind from eons of grasping at inherent existence. I mean, who would have thought it was that reason, Why am I depressed? Oh, because you grasp at self-existence, darling. Oh, yeah? We thought it was because someone didn't love me. It's a view in the mind. Programmed, he says, for eons. So instinctive. And you can say, actually, the entire view in the physical world of the scientific views, all our views of philosophy, of psychology, are expressions. You know, well, you say the scientific view is an expression. The scientific, the materialist view is an expression of this nihilistic view. There is nothing. So then we start to hear about, there's a self, and lots of people in psychology talk about a self, and Jung talks about a self, and the Christians talk about a self, and the Hindus talk about a self. You know, we might think that Jung and Christianity have anything in common. They do. They both talk about a self. One calls it a soul, Jung calls it a self. And we all believe there's a self. So in that way, when we're feeling all perky and up, there is a self. Wow, you know, special and holy, and it's in there somewhere. That's the reification view. And that too is an exaggeration. That's the one when we hear dependent arising, we mistake it as there being an inherent self, an eternalistic self, a real self, especially the kind of self. And they're both lies. And this is the tricky part. I always think it's like I heard about Harry Potter. I never read them. But I heard about Harry Potter's platform 9 3/4 at Paddington. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's finding the middle way, which is in between these two truths, is the combination of these two truths, is when the two truths come together as one, which they in reality are, that it's flip sides of the same coin. I think platform 9 3/4 is a good example. You just can't find it. You go from 9, you're looking for it, you get to 10. You go to 10, you're looking for 9, you can't find this wretched 9 3/4. That's the middle way, lady. You can't, it's like invisible to us. We go, oh, there must be something, oh God, there's nothing. Oh, there must be something, oh, there's nothing. That's bipolar, okay? We're all bipolar. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. Buddha had it down 2,500 years ago. He didn't call it bipolar, that's all. He called it attachment and aversion, based on ignorance. That's his way of talking. Because we know, isn't it? When everything's all hunky-dory and gorgeous and you've finally found happiness and you've found your love mate and your soul mate and you feel blissful, you found the job, you blah, blah, everything's divine, now I've got it, it's there, boom, and we lock it in, I've got it forever. That's the eternalistic view. And you're all up and perky. Everything's divine and gorgeous. That's the philosophy that the Christianity and Hinduism and the Muslim view are the philosophical views, a representation, a presentation of that philosophy. God is inherent. God, its nature of God as described in the Christian teachings, is the presentation of inherent existence. No cause, permanent, unchanging, eternal, and it happens to be the cause of everything else. Buddha says that's a wrong interpretation, he says. And then you've got the nihilistic. So we go between these two the whole time, emotionally, just emotionally, instinctively, because it's our views in our mind. Who would have thought? Who would have thought it was a view? And that's what we have to unpack our minds, to get to hear the misconceptions beneath these emotions. And these are the deepest ones. Attachment, anger, jealousy, and pride, and all the other stuff are all the consequences of these. We have to learn those first in high school. So how do things exist? How does this I exist actually? And all Buddha is saying is getting into sync with how the I exists actually. That is what brings liberation from something. It's view, the mind, seeing things. So the way everything is now in our mind, the way Buddha's saying is everything in our mind is a view. Like a big surprise. Who would have thought depression was a view? Who would have thought feeling blissful is a view? But they're views. Meaning what? It's a series of thoughts in the mind. We all know that what my body does, what my speech does, what my hand does, how I behave, how I speak, how I appear, they're all manifestations of my thoughts. What else would they be manifestations of? My feelings and thoughts. And all feelings come down to being thoughts. Even instincts. They can be unpacked to the point of seeing their expressions practiced deeply of a thought. Habits, that's all. Deeply ingrained habits to the point where they're now virtually instinctive. just like if you sit there and play the piano perfectly. If anybody knew nothing about music, they just heard these wonderful sounds. And then they saw a piece of paper with all the notes on it. Nobody ever in a million years would ever relate those two things, would they? You see my point? You don't know it. You'd never know. Those weird things on a piece of paper, these whizzy little notes and things and squares and rounds and bits, peculiar stuff. No one would ever think in a trillion years that music is an expression. Or put it the other way around, those things on the paper are a way of putting into conceptuality the sounds. This is like, so the person who's got the music down, it's instinctive now, isn't it? Because they've internalized all that information. Well, that's what we're doing right now. We wake up in this life completely instinctively angry, instinctively jealous and depressed and grasping and fearful and anxious and worried. And indeed, aren't we lucky, some kindness and love thrown in there, into the mix. And it's just all, whatever we do naturally, whatever we think naturally, whatever we say naturally without being taught, that's what we mean by instinct, which we then reify, but Buddha just says it's the result of practicing it to perfection. Now it's instinctive. That's all. So we have to unpack those instincts, finally, to get to see how they're all coming down to being expressions of views. They can all be turned into thoughts. In other words, when you see someone screaming and shouting in this deep, intense emotion, having a mental breakdown, anxiety and a panic attack, and then you see words written on a piece of paper, you can't see the relationship between that emotion and those words, can you? But you can, just like the music. You can unpack all those emotions and you can turn them into all those words. And all those words, if we're using Buddhist psychology, are the exact description of attachment, what it is and how it is, and jealousy and attachment and jealousy and low self-esteem, all based on ignorance. This entire structured hierarchy of all the negative emotions. And here we are expressing them intuitively because we've been practicing for eons. So we have to unpack them all and get them, turn them into words. Turn them into the words that they actually are. Can you hear my point? This is what you have to do. This is the Buddhist approach. So everything that arises in our mind as a view comes down to being a concept. You can say like that. Our daily life. That's what we have to learn to be our own therapist, to hear those concepts, to hear the thoughts. And all Buddha's saying is in this mind of ours, in this mental consciousness, we have a bunch of thoughts that are reasonably valid, not totally yet, until we realise emptiness. And they're the virtues. They've got some relationship with truth. You can say that. They're closer to truth. And they have the characteristic of joy, of not being suffering, because they're reasonably in sync with dependent arising. Then you've got the other ones, what are called the negative states of mind, which are liars, misconceptions. They're all wrong. They're not valid. They're not in sync with reality, and they cause intense pain because of that. So these are the ones we have to recognise and then remove from our mind. And this is a shock to us. Who would ever have thought that anger is adventitious, meaning not at the core of our being, meaning can be removed, which is what Buddha is saying. Because we think of it as an emotion. And as I said, we think you're abnormal if you didn't have it. Because that's our experience in the West. The Buddha says no. You can get rid of it. And why? So simple. So simple, why? Why? What's the logic? Because it's not true. Because it's a lie. This sounds so peculiar. But the characteristic of all the neuroses is they're conceptions and they're not accurate assessments of reality. This is very surprising to us to hear that it's like this. And this is what we have to unpack and see. So, what is the I? If there is, we use the word I, we use the word self or person or being. We can say roughly they're all synonymous, They're all referring to a certain type of phenomenon that does exist. If we say cup, we know that that's a word referring to a certain type of phenomenon that holds your tea, We say chocolate, we know what chocolate is inside the paper there. We say tissue, we say box, we say thermos, flower, vase, all these English sounds. The minute we hear them, because we've learned English, we know what they refer to, meaning that millisecond we hear it, we then think of that shape, don't we? So we know the meaning. And so that in a simple, uncomplicated way, we can say that's what dependent arising is, all the things that exist conventionally. And this is the interesting point. Look at the word conventional. It's very tasty. This already implies emptiness by convention. So everybody in this room, we'll all go, yeah, that's a cup, I agree. And what's a cup? Well, it's a flat-bottomed container, you know, that holds my tea. That'll do as a definition. It holds liquid, you know, holds your drink, your beverage, as Americans would say. Okay, we all agree. We go, yep, I agree. Yep, so we all put our hand up, I agree. We all shake hands, we sign the contract. We agree. Don't you see? We agree that the sound cup, just the sound cup, we define it, we label it, we agree, we all shake hands. That's what it means by convention. It's just a convention. We agree. That tells us already it's empty, it's merely labelled. Right there it tells us subtle dependent arising. Right there. It's a cup. Why? Okay, why is it a cup? What's the logic? Oh, who says it's a cup? Tell me why it's a cup, please. What's the reasoning for this being a cup? Explain. Somebody? Why is it a cup?
It's got a flat bottom, it's round, it's got a handle.
Okay, and who says that's a cup?
We just learned that the word cup.
Learned. Who from?
Mum or Dad.
And then do you accept what they told you, or why? Why do you accept what they told you?
Just accepted it because
you believe them?
You believe them.
Oh, so you have faith in them?
Yeah.
So then you don't know it's really a cup then? You just believe what Mummy told you?
Yeah, and everyone else says it's a cup, so...
Okay, but no, so that's not enough reason, is it? That's just blind faith, it's foolish, it's ignorance. What's the reason it's a cup? How can you prove it's a cup? How do you prove? You've got to prove it's a cup. Then you can say, I know it's a cup, not believe. Believe's not enough.
Well, you know the definition of a cup is that it holds liquid, and
okay.
so you test that out. And
there you go. Perfect. So you prove it. So what's the definition of cup? We just decided, right?
Flat bottom, round handle.
That does what? Holds tea. So then the proof that it's a cup is what?
Its definition, and it's doing what
No,
it's supposed to.
it is a we say there's a definition, now we have to prove it's true. How would you prove it's true?
You look at it.
No, it's not enough. How would you prove it holds tea? How would you prove it holds tea? There you go, right, now you said it. Good, that's it. So you don't believe Mummy and Daddy. You prove it to be true. Your teacher tells you 1 + 1 is 2, doesn't she? But then she says, go home and prove it. She says, do your homework. Right? You've got to prove it, don't you? This is what we're talking about here. So that's what conventional reality means. You see, but we think reality, this is our problem, this is a reification process. We think reality is coming from up high, from a creator, and it's something to be believed and not understood. Do you hear that view? Oh, it's just, why is it that? Oh, I don't know, I heard it was true. Well, like you even just said, that's what we think reality is. So we believe in reality, we don't even know if it's true. We don't think it's our job to prove it's true. So we're walking around believing what someone else tells us. Buddha calls that ignorance. And that's why we have fear. Because we're believing in things that aren't true. Some things might be true. Aren't we lucky that we believe that 1 and 1 is 2? It happens to be true. So we've got to check it out. Then we've got to go, well, you see, but our trouble is we think 1 and 1 is 2 inherently. It's like coming from God. It's 1 and 1 is 2 is from its own side true. No, it's only true because we made it true. Who created 1 and + 1? Some little Arab fellow, clever bugger, is, getting coming from that ridiculous Roman nonsense. Luckily, that little man came up with this clever view. I presume it was a man. Maybe his wife did it and he got the credit. But you get my point. If this is dependent arising. This is subtle dependent arising. This is already the proof of emptiness. That there is no cup from its own side, in and of itself. A cup is only what we decide is a cup. A cup that we say is a cup. But it's got to function as a cup. And it does. And this is subtle dependent arising. We're just leapt to the end result. Just by establishing how something exists. And the Buddha says, everything in the universe that can be said to be existing conventionally exists like that. This is already proving emptiness. We've leapt ahead of ourselves here. But there's no cup from its own side. This is merely labelled. And this is simply trying to establish how something exists. You have to label it first and then define it. And then it has to fulfill its function. And then it has to make sure there's no other contradiction in somebody else's mind. No other valid cognition that contradicts it. Once we've got that clear, we all shake hands. Now it's a cup. We all agree. And Buddha says everything that exists, exists like that. Hell, enlightenment, if they exist, we have to get to be clear, the label, the definition, but it must function in that way. So if enlightenment exists, we have to see that it functions as omniscience. It functions, that mind pervades the universe. It functions this way. You have to see it. You can't just say, oh yeah, enlightened, anything you like is called enlightened. And that's what we think in our materialist world. We think, because we feel it's true, it must be true. Good enough, we say. This is total, profound insanity. That's why we're all mad. So because, okay, let's go step by step through the 3 levels of dependent arising. First we have to, before we even can begin to discuss something, we have to establish something exists conventionally. So we have established there is a thing called a cup. It does hold my tea. So we can agree now, cup. So now let's discuss how cup exists. Let's take ourselves through these steps. How does cup exist? First we have to establish it. So let's do the I, because the biggest one we think there is, we say when we hear the Buddha's words, there's no self. We hear, we hear, coming from the Hindus, we hear this very strongly. So we just absolutely assume there's no I. There's no I, we think. There's no I. And it's not like that. It's not like that. It's too gross. We hear it too grossly, too crudely. So what is an I? We did this bit yesterday when Les was here. Is Les still here today? No. No, Les? No. Okay. So we did it yesterday, Who's Les? Well, Les, we discussed Les. Let's discuss, what's your name again?
Marianne.
Marianne.
Yeah.
Okay, there's Marianne. So what's Marianne, Mum? Well, Marianne's the name given to that sentient being over there, sitting there, who's an American female, right?
South African.
I beg your pardon, South African. So that's Marianne. So we all agree there is an object, a phenomenon, an existent, that can be cognized by mind, a phenomenon called Marianne. It's there is a phenomenon called cup. What's a cup? Cup is the name you give to the flat bottom container that holds tea. Marianne is the name we give to the South African woman sitting next to the pillow. That'll do for now. To that mind possessor. So Marianne, so in that simple sense, cup exists, Marianne exists. But assumed in that is that we've proven that that's Marianne, but she does function according to the definition. She is female, she is South African, she is alive, she's sitting next to the pillar. And then we have to establish a pillar, and then a thing, and then that, and everything we've stated there we establish in the same way. So it's all this sort of smoke and mirrors, we have this kind of illusory sentence coming together, everything is established by by our minds. So there's Marianne. So okay, how does Marianne exist? So you just transpose or put instead your word for I, your I, there. How do I exist? How does the I exist? How does the self exist? So first we have to establish we are a person, a self, a being. That is the label. We're not a cup, we're not a toilet, we're not a pillar. Be reasonable. You do fit the definition of being a human being, let's say. Okay? So we have to say conventionally, you do exist. There is a self. Self, person, they're synonymous. They're just saying another word for the same thing. So that I do exist. Simple. There is an I that does exist. Very simple. There is a cup that does exist. But it's a question of understanding how it exists. And that's the tricky part. So when people hear about the teachings and they hear the Buddha says there's no creator, or Buddha says there's no soul. So we think there are two options. There's either a soul or there's a not. And so Buddha's a nihilist, says there's no soul, there's no self. It's not like that. It's much more nuanced than that. We've got to really get it more clear. Let's do that. So there is a self. There is a dependent arising self. There is a self that exists at 3 levels of dependent arising. The first one, or same as cup and toilet and good and bad, whatever does exist exists in the same way. First of all, the subtlest, the grossest level of dependent arising is that there is a self that does exist in dependence upon various factors, and there's 3 levels. The first one, in dependence upon causes and conditions. Also, these three levels of dependent arising, in another, taken from another perspective, are the three ways in which Buddha argues with the prevailing views about how the self exists. So all Buddhist schools agree on this one. This is the point, the first one, where he argues with the Hindu position of an Atma that they do say does exist without depending on causes and conditions. Or which is permanent, as they call it. Permanent meaning not changing from moment to moment. Buddha argues with that one. And all the Buddhist schools agree with that one. Now this is where I got in first, came first. Karma, the law of karma, is an example of this kind of dependent arising in reference to the object called a person. Karma doesn't refer to cups. We'd say the law of cause and effect refers to the object called cup. The law of cause and effect refers to the object called person, but when it comes to a person, it's also known as the law of karma. So karma is a brilliant example, a best fantastic example of how I is a dependent arising, and it's the perfect way to smash, to break down, to loosen the grip of ego grasping, which is the colloquial term for the root delusion that clings primordially to a self-existent I, self-existent cup, self-existent everything else. But ego grasping is used referring to it when it refers to grasping at the object called a self, a me, an I. So thinking about karma is the greatest way to break that down. So why? Well, look at our, again, back to our emotional experiences every day. All the emotions of depression, jealousy, anger, attachment, low self-esteem, arrogance, they are all expressions of the belief in the self-existent I, in the poor self-pity me, as Lama Yeshe calls it, that didn't ask to get born, whose fault it is not, to whom good things and bad things happen. That's how we feel about our I. That's the emotional expression of the belief in an inherent I, which is the philosophy, the view we hold in our mind every microsecond. So thinking about karma, how this I does exist, but guess what? I'm not some innocent victim. I'm the creator of myself. It puts you in the center of responsibility for every single one of your experiences. It's unbelievably powerful. This other one, Lama Yeshe would call this view of self-pity, literally he'd say it's like schizophrenic. The sense of self we have now is so disconnected from me and everything else. So it's almost like when the sense of self is so deep, it's like there's no sense of self at all. You have this big fat lump of nothingness who didn't ask to get born. No wonder we have fear. No wonder we have fear. Because we're believing in this is true. And Buddha says it isn't true. My mind is a continuity of mental moments. Every microsecond of what I think and do and say produces me. So whatever I am, whatever I experience, the main cause is what I did. It puts me in the center in a valid way. So it grows up. We grow up as a result of this. It loosens the grip of the fearful, self-pity me. The poor me that didn't ask to get born, to whom bad things happen, which causes so much fear and panic every day. It counteracts fear. It's taking responsibility, growing up. And that's just thinking about karma. So the second level of dependent arising, the level at which the I exists in dependence upon various factors. In this case, more subtly, the I exists in dependence upon the parts, the aggregates, as Buddha would call the parts. So this is counteracting a subtler misconception, and this is known as subtle selflessness by most Buddhist schools of thought, except the Prasangika view, which is said to be the actual meaning of Buddhist teachings. The first one is known as gross selflessness, Buddha's view of there's no I existing without depending on causes and conditions. And so this second one is, for the Prasangika school, is gross selflessness, and it's already extremely textual. But for the other schools, is subtle selflessness. Because they all say there is something that can be referred to as the I. Some call it consciousness, some call it the what's that Chitta Mantra, you that word? Chitta Mantra, is that what we call it?
Alayakai.
That one, yeah, that one. So they all say there is something that can be referred to as the I. That there is the I. They all pinpoint something. And Buddha says it's just nonsense. And this view of Prasangika says it's impossible. Because if there were, it would be self-existent. But nothing can exist that doesn't exist upon depends. Nothing can exist without depending on something. So let's look at this one. It's most tasty. So okay, let's remember everything that arises in my head. Let's say our head, all my roommates, all my thoughts. They're all thoughts. Everyone. Whether it's you screaming in agony of depression and fear, or whether you're sitting there very clinically saying 1 and 1 is 2. They both come down to being thoughts. One is more habitual and is emotional, and is full of fear and panic. It's still a series of thoughts. It's not surprising, but we can see it's logically true. Everything, in other words, everything that arises in our mind is a thought. And this is the point. Like I said, some of those thoughts are reasonably in sync with reality, and the others aren't at all. And they're the lies, the misconceptions, and they're the causes of sorrow. And they're adventitious, and they can be removed. So, the same exercise, I always do it, I'll do it again, it's always useful, We have to establish that things are true when we say them. The words we say, think of it like this, very simply. If I say words, we surely would want those words to be accurate descriptions of something that does exist. Can you hear that? It's kind of, it's very helpful. That's called truth. And Buddha says we're living in lies most of the time. No wonder we're insane and make everybody else insane. Okay, so let's establish something. First I say my table has a cup and a box of tissues and a thermos. So let's prove that's true. Who says? Okay, come on, prove it, Robina. Hear my words, okay? So let's prove it, please. So we have to know the definition of my table, cup, tissues, and thermos, don't we? Then we have to use our eyes and we look at the shapes and we see the shape and we can deduce that shape is labelled thermos, etc., etc. So that's not enough yet, is it? We've got to really prove it's true that my table has a thermos, a cup, and a thing, and a tissue, right? We agree? It's true, isn't it? Reasonable, perfectly reasonable. So that means we have to find, would you agree, 4 separate phenomena, each of which is not the other. Because a cup has to be something that isn't a table, you agree? Because it's got its own definition, hasn't it? And tissues has to be something that's not a cup or a table, and thermos has to be something that's not tissues, cup or table. You agree with that? You agree, don't you? It's reasonable. It's a way of breaking it down, be very clear. So I will show you the cup, and I'll show you the tissues, and I'll show you the thermos, and I'll show you the table. 4 separate phenomena, conventionally. You accept, don't you? Easy, isn't it? Okay. Well, I have a foot, a nose, and a hand. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes.
You agree? You agree?
Yes.
Okay. So same logic. If that's conventionally, hear the words please, just simple conventional truth. Prove it. Come on, Robina. Prove you're right. I will, okay, I'll tell you. There's my foot, which is not a knee, and it's not a hand, yeah? There's a hand, which is not a foot, and is not a knee, and is not anything else, yeah? You agree? You agree? There's a nose. Same, isn't it? And the 4th phenomenon is called I, isn't it? You agree? You agree? So I have to find an I, don't I? That is distinct, singular, that is not a hand, that is not a nose, and that is not a foot. Don't I? Well, please point it out. Which part of Robina is the I that isn't something else? Any ideas? Because we believe there's an I, don't we? I have a nose, I'll say. You are ugly. I am not. Panic stations, you know. So which is the piece of me called I that isn't the rest? Can you hear the words?
Yeah.
Simple words, not complicated, but it's most annoying, isn't it? Because we're sitting here knowing there is an I, believing instinctively in our bones, which is reinforced every day in all our behaviour, that there is definitely a piece in there. So when we start to think about it, we really do feel, when we say the word, I am this, or I have a hand, we'll think there's an I that's the owner, and then there's the hand that's owned. We will think that, won't we? We do think it, don't we?
Yeah.
But this is what Buddha says we have to do, this type of analysis, to see that what we're believing in isn't an accurate assessment. So when we say have a thought is hand, isn't it? I say hand. You agree it's a word, yeah? And you agree therefore it's coming from a thought, isn't it? You agree? And we all happen to know the meaning of that word, don't we? It refers to a thing that with 5 digits that usually on the end of an arm that holds something, yeah? You agree?
Yeah.
That people have, and monkeys and so on. You agree, don't you? So the thought, every thought we have, has to relate to something that exists. It's helpful. To have a mind that's full of things that don't exist, which is why we're crazy, which we think is great, we call it fantasy. We think it's noble to live in fantasy. I mean, talk about insanity. It is helpful to have thoughts that are in sync with reality. Buddha says that's wisdom, baby, and wisdom brings happiness. But right now, as one of my friends Pende said, we believe. We know that, let's discuss each phenomenon. So we'll do a bit more breaking down, then we'll see. So we'll go, we'll say, I have a nose and a hand, and a foot, and pipi and kaka, and knees and bones and blood and all the other millions of pieces, right? You agree? So if we can, so the way Buddha's saying it, this is bringing us now to the subtlest level of dependent arising. This is the subtlest one, which the Prasangika school holds, which is what Rinpoche says is the subtlest meaning, the hardest one to understand, is that there is no I that doesn't depend on a mind calling it that. So first one is there's no I that doesn't depend on causes. Then the second one is there's no I that doesn't depend upon the parts. And the subtlest one is there's no I that doesn't depend upon the mind calling it that. That doesn't depend upon the concept. And this is the hardest one to hear. So another way of putting this is, therefore, cup, I, pillar, carpet are thoughts, are words, are concepts, labels that we use to refer to a bunch of parts. And that's valid, that's the way to say it. So the word cup is the term we use to refer to the flat bottom clay container that holds tea. You with me? Mm-hmm. So we could say that cup is the name, just the name, and the flat bottom clay container that holds tea is the base of the name. You agree with that? Mm-hmm. So from this point of view, the base exists, and the name is just the name. So then we'll go, oh, thank God, there is something after all. Oh God, what a relief, there is a base. There is a handle. Oh, phew. No. Because handle is simply a name we use, a thought that we use to refer to its parts. So we'll go, oh, thank God there's clay and paint. Phew, there's something. No. So same argument every time. So it's this sort of like, it's like this sort of smoke and mirrors. It's a way of talking. It's a convenient way of talking in this conventional world. But it's really all smoke and mirrors. It's a way, like I say, it's like illusion. So there is a cup that does exist, that does hold the tea. There is a Mary Ann that does exist, who is a South African woman, sitting on the chair next to the pillar. But there's no cup that exists like that in and of itself, from its own side. That's the part we don't understand. And that's the part we have to get. That's the distinction between there is a cup that does exist that holds your tea, but not from its own side. There is a cup, there is a Marianne, there is a Robina, there is a carpet, but not from its own side. The first level is there is a carpet that does exist as a result of causes and conditions. And you won't find any carpet among any one of those causes and conditions. The string is not the carpet. The paint, the colour, the weaving machine, the weaver, they're all the causes. They're not the carpet. You won't find among the causes a thing called a carpet, because carpet is the result of all the causes. When I first studied all this with Geshe Tekchok, my philosophy teacher, he used the example of the object called Robina, which of course is why I remember it. And he said, it can be said that everything in the universe up to the first moment of Robina, or carpet, or Mary Ann, or table, or the object called enlightenment, or hell, or whatever we are positing as existing, that everything in the universe up to the first moment of that phenomenon is validly a cause and a condition for the existence of that phenomenon. Because if you think about it, once you start looking at all the causes of Robina, you will just keep going back to beginningless time. Because every time you posit mother, well, you can't posit mother without positing her mum. You go back to beginningless mums, and then beginningless dads, and then beginningless this and that. So everything in the universe is not an invalid statement. Causes and conditions. There's no carpet in there. Carpet is the name carpet is the product, is the culmination of those causes and conditions. But you won't find carpet among them. Then the second one, parts. We believe, as my friend Pende said, that there's an I in there walking hand in hand with anger and jealousy and nose and teeth and bones and blood and pee-pee and caca. We think there's a part called I. We think there's a part called I. Some of us, sometimes we think it's the mind is the I. This is the I, that's the I. We've got to argue with these and see how they can't be possible. Even the simple logic when you say, well, mind is the I. Well, excuse me, what's the definition of mind? It's that which cognizes things, okay? That which is clear and cognizes things. Now, do you accept that I is a name? Mary Ann is that person's name, isn't it? Over here, you agree, Mary Ann? We agree that Mary Ann is a mind possessor. She has a mind, you agree? You agree she has a mind? Mm-hmm. But she also has a body, doesn't she? Mm-hmm. So then we say, well, the real Mary Ann is the mind. Well then, what's the definition of Mary Ann? Okay, Mary Ann is the combination of body and mind sitting in this chair, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Mind is the name given to the part of Mary Ann called the part that cognizes, you agree? The body of Mary Ann is the part that is of blood and bones and pee-pee and caca, you agree? Mm-hmm. So how can mind be Mary Ann? You just said Mary Ann is body and mind. How can Mary Ann just be mind? You're hearing what I'm saying? Yeah. If Mary Ann is body and mind, you can't have it the other way and say Mary Ann is really her mind. So make up your mind, please. If her mind is called Mary Ann, we'll call it that and change the definition. But Mary Ann is that which cognizes. So we'll change the definition of mind. And then sometimes we think it's a part. The other time we think there must be another part, which is the soul idea. That there is this little part in there that's called soul. So I've got a nose and a hand and a mind and a soul. Like there's a little I in there, as Pende says, walking hand in hand with the other parts. And that's how we talk. So who's the central player in our head? It's I, isn't it? It's an I, isn't it? I is the central player. So we know that my thoughts are made up of, my thoughts are made up of anger, some angry thoughts some days, some jealous thoughts, some depressed thoughts, you agree? Some loving thoughts, some kind thoughts, some generous thoughts, you agree with this? Some music thoughts, some mathematics thoughts, some computer thoughts, all the thoughts that are arising. Whatever we see and do, all these thoughts, millions and millions and millions of thoughts, you agree? All the roommates, millions of roommates in our head. So one way of putting it is we tend to think there's a landlord in there called Robina, kind of holding it all together, isn't it? And every single thing all the roommates do, they're like every time anger does something, Robina gets hurt. And then love does something, Robina gets happy. So they're all like these extensions of Robina. But that's sort of Robina, there's a boss there called Robina. We think that, don't we? The Buddha says you don't need it. It's an unnecessary embellishment. All the parts of you work very nicely without a boss. And that's the same as having a creator. We don't need a creator, Buddha says. It's an unnecessary embellishment. We don't need to have something out there existing inherently and internally that is the creator of everything. He says it's unnecessary. All the parts of me nicely do their work. That's called karma. We don't need that unnecessary embellishment. So the same with the I. We do the same thing as a creator. We over-exaggerate. You know, Buddha says there is omniscient mind, but not a creator. And you can become omniscient. There is all-pervasive, all-knowing, all-loving, all-compassionate mind. That's a Buddha mind. And we can become one. They do exist out there, but they're not a creator and they're not inherent. But there is an I, but not inherent. And this is the subtlest one. It's like smoke and mirrors. There is an I, there is Mary Ann, but it's the name given to the parts. So from the point of view of the phenomenon called Mary Ann, there is the base, which is the parts, and there's the name imputed upon the parts. That's a fine way to put it. And then, of course, we grasp, like I said, well, there is a hand after all, what a relief. No, because hand is a name you give to its parts. Or there is a finger. No, finger is a name you give to its parts. Or there is atoms. No, everything exists like that. So it's in that sense like an illusion. So when you break all this down, you get it clear in your head, you start to think of it this way. You'll still say, hi there, how are you? I'm Robina. But you don't believe it. Instead of saying, oh, the name my mother gave me is Robina, I'm the person known as Robina. We don't say that, we just talk normal. I'm Robina, but you don't believe in it. You know it's just the name imposed upon these parts, given to you by your mum, you know. When Lama Rinpoche, he was recognised as a reincarnated Lama, as you probably know. He's a Sherpa. Sherpas are Tibetan racially, the Tibetan Buddhists. And he was said to be the reincarnation of one great yogi called Kunsang Yeshe. The book out in the shop called the Lado Lama is the biography of Kunsang Yeshe, the Sherpa Lama, Nyingma yogi. So he was this great layman, a lay yogi, a hidden yogi, who, had a wife and kids and incredibly poor, so very poor up there. They were, till the tourists started coming. And he would, go to Tibet and sell and buy salt and that kind of thing. And he was a great yogi. In the last few years of his life, 20, 30, I can't remember, he, some spot between where he lived and somewhere else, there's just this hole in the wall, basically, which they stuffed, where they stored the radishes, or the onions, I can't remember. And so he pulled them out and moved in. He said Guru Rinpoche gave him that cave, so it became his cave. He lived there, and then he passed away. And then, he promised that when he was older, the local people, who his attendants and his benefactors, that all loved their Lama Kunsang Yeshe, they asked him to start a school for all the local boys, meaning a monastery. There were several young Rinpoches and things. And he said, he won't yet, but they would be. So he said he was too old, he wouldn't do it, but he promised he'd do it in his next life. So anyway, one of his attendants, I think, was old, this woman. She had several kids, and she had her fifth baby. I think fifth, fourth, I can't remember, third maybe, can't remember. And it turned out to be this little person. I think he wasn't called Zopa then, so little Zopa. So from the time he could crawl, apparently, he would, as soon as his mother would turn her back, he'd be crawling up the hill, they didn't know it was back to, but he'd go towards the Laudo cave. Known as the Laudo Lama, the radish Lama. So she'd drag him home, He's relentless, very determined. If she turned her back, he'd be gone. Then from the time he could talk, his sister said, he'd be trudging up the hill. Come home! He'd say, no, that is my home. So they say this about the great yogis, the meditators, the lamas, that they remember vividly from the time they're tiny, they know who they are. But they're stuck in this little baby body, they can't do anything. I remember Denpa Locho Rinpoche, one wonderful Lama in Dharamsala, one of Lama Zopa's lamas, one of my lamas. He said he remembered as a tiny child being immensely frustrated because he couldn't do or say what he wanted because he was a tiny thing in his little wee body, but he knew who he was. There's this vivid awareness these holy beings have, So Lama Zopa Rinpoche, being a great tantric yogi, he controlled his death process and chose his new rebirth, and he zapped into the womb of this mother who was down the hill, being one of his servants, one of his attendants. So eventually, then the sister said that he used to, whenever he played games, he always played the role of a lama. He sat there and he made his little mud pies, made mud pie bells and mud pie dorjies and mud pie tormas, And then he'd announce all his benefactors were coming for the puja, and he'd announce all the names of his previous benefactors. They were going to come from wherever they lived, So his mummy thought, I better check up here. So she took to the local lama, I don't know who it was. And then he confirmed that he was probably the reincarnation of Kunsang Yeshe. So then he got formally recognised. So anyway, getting to my story here, another story. When he was about 8, he told the story about how he was up in another monastery with his manager. They handed over to their manager. They're very professional, these people, right? And he's up in a monastery way up in the mountains somewhere, and he told this story, which I told the story. How he said over the very big river, very rough river, it's turbulent, and over the other side he could see these very strange looking people. Pale skin, straw-coloured hair, you know, Anglos. And I think, anyway, many of his students are Anglos, you know, white people. So he wanted to meet these people, and his manager didn't want him to go because it's so treacherous, and there's a little rocky little bridge, you know, one of those rope bridges, I think, I'm not sure. But he insisted on going, so he brought a bowl of potatoes, because you can't go empty-handed, you know, but he fell into the river with his potatoes. So then he told us a story about how he's drowning, and this is I'm getting to my point. He said, the head was bobbing up and down. He's meant his own head, but he was being very objective about it, you know. The head. And he could see his manager running up and down the bank, you know. And of course they don't learn swimming up there, so he couldn't swim. And he's like he's coming up for air. And he could see the manager, and then he said, the thought occurred, the person known as the Lama is about to die. And then he said, I didn't know anything about emptiness, but there was no fear. So this is an expression, exactly those words indicate perfectly he'd realised emptiness. Because even the word, as he said as a child, 8, never had teachings yet. The person known as the Lama, the only person who can say that when you're threatened with death is a person who's realised that there is no inherent I from its own side. You see my point? Because look at the way we refer to instinct for survival, which we think is this thing that just is real, that everyone exists. It is real. We all do have it. But Buddha would have liked that term, I think. That's referring to grasping at the inherent I. So the way Rinpoche responded was the proof. And this is the way you talk. This is how you experience it. So therefore, there was no fear. And this is the point that's outrageous, finally. We assume fear is normal. Look at the daily anxiety we have. That's called fear. And why? It's a function of all these delusions. All the delusions, the normal daily ones, which are rooted in the root delusion, the clinging to the inherent I, known colloquially as ego grasping, they're all rooted in fear. And why fear? Because they're not true. They're not true statements of reality. They're lies. This seems very peculiar to us. So when you've conquered, annihilated from your mind, not just conquered, when you, more than just stop believing in, you've finally removed from your mind, and this is the point, removed from your mind even the tiniest thought about ego grasping and all the delusions. Those thoughts simply don't arise in your mind anymore. And what caused that to happen is to see the absence nakedly, which we're going to get to now, emptiness. Do you see the absence of the fantasy life? You've seen the truth of it. That's what conquers fear. As Lama Zopa says, when you realise emptiness, there is no fear. So now all we've been talking about is dependent arising, implying this emptiness. So let's speak emptiness out a bit more. But we've been implying it the whole time. Because, as Lama Yeshe puts it, dependent arising, which is what we've been talking about, is the king of logics to prove emptiness. So, let's look at the phenomenon called emptiness. Remember, everything that does exist, everything that can be called an existent, is defined by its being able to be cognized by mind. So whatever does exist can be cognized. So, and then second, talking the way we're talking, or we have these thoughts, right? So every thought we have has to relate to what exists, otherwise we're in big trouble. So the thought, emptiness. It's a word. We know the English word. So it's a simple word. But it's got different definitions, hasn't it, according to the system you're talking about. Just like the word flat. If you're learning geometry, you know that a table is flat. But then suddenly you hear about England, they used to live in flats. And now they call them apartments. You think, well, that's peculiar, living in a flat. I'm trying to visualise living in a flat, you know. Then you talk about B flat when you study music. So it's the same sound coming out the mouth, but there's no other relationship, is there? They're different definitions, right? Well, let's get the definition here of emptiness, please. I can say, my cup is empty. And you know, because a cup is that which holds tea, that means not empty of elephants, empty of tea. You know that, you know. The same with the room. Oh, the room's empty. You know it doesn't mean empty of elephants. You know it means empty of people. It's full of furniture, but we tend to mean it's empty of people. So we use the word in ordinary daily life. Nothing special about it. Simple. It just means something's not there. Does it not? Something that could exist doesn't. You agree with that? Something that could exist doesn't exist. That's what we mean by empty normally, isn't it? Normal, isn't it? Okay. So, okay, let's see how Buddha uses it. He will say, okay, use examples. You can see, if you're not colourblind, okay, everybody, behind the pillar everywhere? You can see it's not red, you agree? Don't you? You agree it's not red, don't you? You agree? So what's the logic for why it's not red? Why isn't it red? Why isn't it red? Oh, prove it. Why is it blue? Come on, why? Just said before, we said it. Why is it blue? No. Why is it blue? Oh, come on. Why is it blue?
Because we agree that it's...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Precisely. We all bought into it. Smoke and mirrors. Okay, very simple. So the way Buddha would put it, please hear my words. Hear my words here. The way Buddha would put it, hear the words. On this cup, there does exist white. Can you see the white? And on this cup, there does exist blue. Yeah, you agree? It's a quaint way to talk, but hear it. So we agree this is a cup?
Yeah.
We agree there's another phenomenon called white that does exist in the world. We agree there's another phenomenon called blue that does exist in the world. And we can say, therefore, on this cup, there is the phenomenon called white. You agree with that, don't you? It's a way of saying, we just say, oh, it's a white cup. But we can say that precisely. Remember, if something does exist, you have to be able to state it and point to something that does exist. So white is a phenomenon that does exist, isn't it? Blue is a phenomenon that does exist. Cup is a phenomenon that does exist. You agree? And they all come together here. You agree? You agree? Okay, good. So we agree there's no red on this cup, don't we? You agree?
Yeah.
So the way Buddha would say it is this. On this cup there does exist white. And on this cup there does exist the absence of red. You can hear that, can't you? And it's true, isn't it? It's not how we talk, is it? So what we're doing here is turning what sounds nihilistic, called emptiness, into a phenomenon that does exist. Can you hear that? And we need to do that. We've got to turn it into a proper noun, a proper thing that does exist. And then what Buddha wants us to do is to observe and cognize that phenomenon of emptiness. So if you were colourblind and you saw red where it didn't exist, and then let's say, okay, this is the point. Let's say we wouldn't try to bully Mary Ann. Let's say Mary Ann says, no, it's red, it's red. We're not going to sort of bully her into believing it's not red. No, sorry, to believing it's white and blue. That she just lives in fear because she sees red, but I'm not supposed to say it's red. Oh, it's blue and white, but she doesn't believe it because she sees red. So we have to get her to understand how the truth, don't we? We have to get her to see the truth, don't we? And what will we do? Well, we'd have to first check the lighting. First check her English. Maybe she speaks Afrikaans. She's not used to English yet. You know, and she doesn't know the word red. She's got it wrong. We check that she's got the right word in her mind. We check that her eyes are right, don't we? That could be the problem. We check her glasses. There's not many other dependent arisings you have to fix, are there? You agree? So we get all those fixed. Yeah? And then we show the cup again. What will Mary Ann see? What will happen? How will she respond? She'll get a shock, won't she? She'll get a shock. Don't you think you'll get a shock? And what will she see? What will she see? What will she see?
She'll see blue and white.
Okay. No, she won't first.
She'll still see red, but she'll say...
No, she won't. No, you haven't got it at all. No, you haven't. Yeah, that's right. You haven't got it, darling. No, listen. We've just sorted out your eyes. We've sorted out your glasses. We've sorted out the mistakes. So there's no longer a mistake being left. You get my point,
I get
Mary
your
Ann?
point, yeah.
So you look at the cup again, what do you see?
I see aha.
And what will the aha see? What will you
It's
see?
no more, right? It's
That's
no.
so okay. Let's say you convinced there's $1,000 in your bank. You know there's $1,000. You just know it's there, and you open up the internet. You open up your account, and you see minus 1,000. Once you go, oh my God! Once you say that, and you go, oh my God, there's no $1,000. Once you say that. But if you knew there was no $1,000 there, you wouldn't say that, would you? Because you'd expect it. So the only reason you get a shock, a aha moment, is because you thought something that existed there doesn't exist. So what you'll see is the absence of that thing, won't you? And that's the aha moment, isn't it? Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see?
Yeah.
You think when your hubby died, or worse, when your hubby leaves you, or he died or he leaves you, when you go to your house every day, what do you see in that house every day?
The absence.
What do you feel? It's the absence of your husband. I walk into your house, I'm not going to see the absence of any husband. I don't know, do I? Because I don't expect there to be Fred there. So the whole point of this is when we see something that isn't there, we believe there's $1,000 when it's not. We believe there's red where it's not. We believe there's an inherent I where there is not. So, another example, another way to put it, then we think, oh well, there's no I. It's not, oh well, I see nothing. No, it's not like it's more subtle than that. You don't see nothing. The other example I like to use, is that you're running late and your car keys are in the drawer by the door. They're always there. You're convinced and you're running late, you open the drawer, you get a big shock. Why? What do you see?
No keys.
Absence of keys. Put it that way, absence of keys. The emptiness of keys. It's a really vivid phenomenon that your mind cognizes, is it not? Can you hear the point? But it's only in your mind. I sticking my nose in your drawer, what will I see when I open the drawer? I will just see nothing, won't I? But you will see the absence of something you thought was there, and that's the point. You will see the absence of something you thought was there, and that's why it's such a shock. So in that sense, the absence of keys is a very vivid phenomenon that does exist for your mind. Can you hear that?
Yes.
It's in this way they talk about emptiness. So all we're trying to do, of course, is not just see the absence of keys where there could be keys, because keys exist. The absence of red where there was no red. The absence of elephants. Those things all could exist, but this is a more dramatic, more radical absence. It's the absence of an inherent I, which we don't even get. It's an absence of an inherent I, which Buddha says could never exist. It's a complete fabrication. And the belief in it is the cause of all suffering, and all samsara, and all universes, and all hell realms, and all God realms, and all animals, and all humans, and all suffering. The belief in this one. So it's quite a big one to see the absence of. So all I'm getting at, the main thing I'm trying to get at here is that the idea of an emptiness of something is not just, we think of it as nothing in the drawer. Like a nihilism. That's nihilism. Oh, there's nothing there. Not like that. It's a vivid thing that does exist for your mind when you first see it. So Lama Zopa's words expresses that he knew, because of his past meditation, although he didn't say that there was no inherent Zopa. The person known as the Laudo Lama. I didn't know anything about emptiness, meaning that life, but there was no fear. So that whole story is an expression, is a proof of the fact that in his mind there was no grasping at an inherent Zopa. Can you hear the point? Therefore, no fear. So any questions about all that? It was quite long, I'm so sorry. Time to go home. It's 12 o'clock, where else now? What's yours? Okay, questions about all of that now, please. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes,
So when going back to the cup, and when we talk about defining the cup, one of the things we use is the essential function of it, which is that it holds liquid, right?
And this is a crucial one.
So
Got to prove that it functions in that way before you can finally agree it's that.
right, and if we dropped the cup and it smashed into pieces, it's no longer a cup.
No longer a cup there.
So would you say there's any essential function to being a human sentient being?
Well, of course, we have to define if we human exist. The way to define something is first have the name, then label, then define it, and the second part of a definition is the job, the function. So what's the function of it? So how would you define a human being? I mean, we're talking about a potential Buddha, the one the Buddha says is the function, but an ordinary human, depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a Buddhist, then a human is defined in one way. If you talk to a materialist scientist, a human is another one. So it depends on who you're talking to. So from the Buddhist point of view, you know, you could say that the actual function of a human is to become a Buddha, because this is where we get into what they call Buddha nature. All right. So Buddha says, again, this is how we don't talk like this, and I like to use the example of an acorn. So we know, don't we, because we've learned botany, that little round thing with a hat on it is the main cause of that magnificent tree over there. I mean, again, we don't see the relationship. If you've never learned botany, you would never know in a million years that little thing caused that. Do you understand my point? So, but we know because we've learned botany that an acorn is a seed that will produce an oak tree, given all the appropriate conditions. You agree with that? So, the way the Buddha would put it would be that all acorns possess oak tree nature. You agree with that? This is the way of talking, isn't it? Well, Buddha says all minds, not just humans, all minds possess Buddha nature. So by definition, an acorn is a potential oak tree. You agree? By definition, all acorns are potential oak trees. Well then, by definition, a mind for the Buddha is a potential Buddha. That's its actual purpose, its actual final purpose. That's what it is in its nature. Every sentient being in its nature is a potential Buddha. There's no choice about it. So that, what you'd say, from the Buddhist perspective, is the purpose of life. The Buddha is, right? Just necessarily. And it's a logical point. And what Buddha means is freedom from suffering and full of goodness. And this is then all the Buddha's methodology is all laying out how to do it. You know?
So if someone were a human being in this lifetime but didn't have the mental capacity to reach enlightenment in this lifetime, that's only one lifetime in a long. So that's just the karma of this lifetime.
Sorry, what?
I guess I'm just thinking, kind of going back to this idea of breaking everything down into parts. I think we get confused by that, especially if humans don't have either.
What do you mean? Which part's confusing about breaking things down into parts?
Well, I was thinking about, so if somebody in a particular lifetime had a human form but didn't have the mental capacity to reach enlightenment, then we're kind of looking at a longer mental continuum than just that lifetime.
Well, clearly, all of us, most of us probably won't get enlightenment in this
Right.
life. So what's the point there, then? I don't get the point. I'm missing your point, sweetheart.
I'm not sure I have a point on that. I'm just trying to sort of sort out this idea of essential function, because we may not be able to...
No, because it's okay. It's not the point, though. So to forget human, mind is the fundamental point here.
Yeah.
All sentient beings, all mind possessors, this is the main one, are naturally potential Buddhas. So it happens to be said about a human that as a human we have a few conditions that will allow us to accomplish it, that's all.
Okay.
So being the fundamental, the core of something, and then naming its function are two separate things perhaps, aren't they?
Right.
Do you see?
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Would a Buddhist agree with Descartes that I think, therefore I am, and I am, therefore I
I don't know,
think?
I never studied him, so can you say more of what he says?
I think, therefore I am.
I know,
I
can you say-
exist. I
Exist because?
I exist because there is something that's thinking, and that something that's thinking exists, and we call it I.
Well, I mean, loosely speaking, it sounds, Buddha would not disagree with this. It's a question of how Descartes really unpacked all that, isn't it? Yeah, it sounds a bit similar. Buddha would not disagree, I think, with just a statement. Yeah. Yes.
I have a question about anger.
Anger.
So inherently, sentient beings are good, and having some amount of anger.
Hang on, inherently we're good. What do you mean by that?
In the sense that having a little bit of anger, a little bit of jealousy or envy, all these afflictive emotions, it's not a normal thing.
What?
The way we see it.
What do you mean by inherently good?
That we shouldn't have those emotions, right? We shouldn't, or if we're.
What do you mean by inherently good?
When we reach enlightenment, I guess that's what I mean.
Okay, so when we reach it, so okay, put it this way then. What Buddha would be saying, what's your name?
Tanvi? Tanvi?
Spell it.
Tanvi.
Tanvi.
Yeah.
Okay, Tanvi. Buddha would say that that Tanvi is a sentient being, Tanvi is a human sentient being, Tanvi is a mind possessor. And being a mind possessor, this mind is possessed by a person called Tanvi. It has the potential to be fully developed in goodness, which is the core of our being, and the ability to rid the mind of all the badness.
Right.
So to say that we're inherently good isn't quite the same way of saying that. So Buddha would say that about the lions and the tigers and the terrorists and the pedophiles and the rapists and the Hitlers as well.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not saying, oh, they're really being nice after all, but what he's saying is that they've got the potential to change. They've got the potential to rid the mind of the bad habits and to fully develop the good habits. Everybody possesses that potential, but please keep away from those people because they might hurt you. So they're not really being good, they're being bad. You'll get my point. So it's just a way of saying it. So yes, given that goodness is at the core of your being and can be fully developed and badness can be rid of, what's your point? Therefore,
Well, when there's, if there's injustice done to us.
to the world or ourselves and others, yeah.
It's hard not to get angry.
Of course it is, yeah.
So how do we, what should we
Do instead.
or do instead?
Yeah, okay.
Think instead?
I love the way Martin Luther King said it. He said it's all right to be angry, and he meant there, be very specific using Buddhist terms, he meant to find fault, to see there is suffering in the world. Look, there's racism, there's sexism, there's terrorism. Would you agree? That's a statement of fact. Why do we assume we have to be angry about it? Let's just do it one step at a time. So answer that question, we'll go to the next step. So we can see that's a fact, can't we? That's not being angry, that's seeing a simple statement that there is suffering in the world. So then I will say to you now, let's discuss it. Why do we assume we should be angry with it? So I suppose our next point is to define what we mean by angry, isn't it?
Right.
So what we mean by angry, would you agree, is we then start to go, how dare that we see the people who are suffering, and then we have to find the people who did it to them, and then we get angry with the people who did it to them. We rant and rave and kill and shout, and then we go and wage war on those people. We kill them thinking we're going to solve the problem. That would be an expression of anger, would you agree?
Right.
Seeing the person as bad and the cause of the suffering, and then hating them and wanting them to suffer.
Yeah.
Well, Buddha says that's not cool. That's too extreme for a start. And that's first point he says, that's only going to harm you. Yeah? That anger will only harm you. And that's the first point to get, which is really hard. To see how that emotion, that extreme, exaggerated, unhappy, disturbed emotion that wants to find fault, that over-exaggerates, that wants to harm them, that wants them to suffer, which is a really strong expression of anger, look at the world, that, he says, is going to destroy you. First point. Then he gets to look at karma. And he says, when we start to break down why does someone suffer at the hand of a terrorist and why does a person become a terrorist, we're going to discover they've got a very close history together from past karma and that they're now just reversing roles. It's a simple way of putting karma. But equally though, we never ask these questions, when good things happen. So you've got a lovely friend, we can say you've got a history together and you've been good to each other in the past, so now you're continuing that by being good to each other again. So everything, he says, that anyone experiences is necessarily the fruit of their own past actions. So the more we internalise that view, which is Buddha's philosophical view, he says that's how it is, then what that's going to do to us slowly is realise I'm sick of the suffering and I have to stop being angry. And then slowly I'm going to start to realise that these people out there, due to their own past actions, are in this insane asylum together. And you start to have compassion for them. You still see there's injustice. You will still try to stop the terrorist. But you'll have a reason in your mind why it's happening, and that's not anger, that's compassion. So it depends on your view, but this is the Buddhist way of putting it. Do you understand? Which takes time. So action is necessary, absolutely. And as Martin Luther King said, and I'll finish the statement, it's all right to find fault, but then you say, what can I do about it? And that's what compassion is. Anger just rants and raves and wants to punch somebody. So it's a wrong view for a start. It's a misconception as a philosophy, and then it causes all these other crazy actions which just perpetuate suffering. This is the Buddhist explanation, roughly. Do you understand? It takes time, as you just said, slowly. And this is why even just talking about an emotion called anger, initially on the face of it, it doesn't seem like it's a philosophy, does it? But it's a really packed, tight philosophy. You unpack anger and you can write the entire philosophy down. A person who assumes they're an innocent victim, a person who assumes that they're asked to get born, a person who assumes that it's not fair, that someone else made me, I got put on this earth, and these people do it to me unfairly. Buddha says every one of those points is a misconception. It isn't like that. A Tibetan friend of mine who was, in 87, when there was the first sort of mini uprising in Tibet, since 59, it was mostly the monks and nuns who were like the little revolutionaries. So when we think of revolution, when we think of demonstrations, we think of anger, There they are out there with their placards shouting. So then he gets arrested, he gets tortured, then he gets released, then he gets, goes demonstrating again. This time he gets, his friend has his head blown off, and then he figures he better escape this time. So he escaped to Nepal. And then as a result of this, he's on hit lists, so his father gets murdered, brother gets murdered. So he's telling me all this, and he's sad, and there are tears, And I said to him, do you ever get angry? And he laughed. He said, angry, what for? And then he said, shock horror, in our words, he said, it's our own fault. He meant karma, very simply karma. This is hideous to our mind. We've got to do so much unpacking there, I can't tell you. He wasn't angry, because he had an explanation for why. And if you analyse, if we have the materialist view, which most of us are brought up with, which we believe in totally as the truth, which means we didn't ask to get born. Excuse me, being rude to God, if we believe that God made us, unless you have total faith in God, which is really hard to have, and I admire people who do it, because then everything's God's will and you accept. We assume we didn't ask to get born. It's the way we exist. We just assume it's true. Whether you're a materialist or a Christian, both agree on one thing, that you didn't ask to get born. It's true, isn't it? Well, no wonder we have fear and panic and anger. It's natural. How dare my mother and father, because they want to have fun, how dare they decide to make another person and then call it Robina and make them a duplicate of them, which is what they think, and they've got anger and depression and jealousy, and then turn me out and give me jealousy and anger and then tell me I've got to grow up, and I go to my therapist and say, I've got to stop blaming my mother. Well, excuse me, my therapist is wrong. Sue your mother. How dare she? It's like Frankenstein and his monster. Extremely arrogant. Back off if you're deluded and don't stop making people, please. But Buddha says they didn't make you, Robina. You had history with them and you ran like a magnet to that womb, so baby, don't blame them. It's not complicated. It just takes time to process it. And then on the basis of having no anger, even more, you have compassion. And that's that story of those Tibetan nuns I always tell. 2003, Richard Gere invited His Holiness to teach in New York, and he invited 20 ex-prisoners. We were discussing working together on prisoner stuff. He didn't in the end. That's okay. Anyway, they invited these 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison. And they were, and people like me were invited who work with people. And they were all talking about their experiences and the dramas and the suffering and the sexism and the racism and all the blah, 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 the politics of it. And prison's a pretty hideous place, especially in this country. And anyway, they also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns who just talked about their suffering. They'd been tortured and sexually abused for a couple of years, They were quiet little Tibetan nuns, tears in their eyes. And then, of course, at the end of their talk, what was clear to all the prisoners? They weren't angry. It was clear these young women were not angry. Every reason in our world for us to be out of our brain with anger, but it was evident they weren't angry. And the final point is, they quietly said at the end of the talk, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers. We knew we must have harmed them in our hearts. So this is the Buddhist philosophy. And this philosophy, internalizing it, then will produce very different emotions. In other words, think really simply. Why do I get angry? It's still the product of not having confidence in karma. Clearly, whether it's angry to myself or angry about somebody else. It's the expression of a victim. That someone does it to me. There's a sense of disconnect. That's why we're so disconnected from ourselves. Even as anger against myself is a disconnect between myself and my thoughts. This is feeling of being a victim. That's why anger comes. If there's no victim, there's no anger. If there's accountability, which is karma, there's no anger, there can't be. Which leads you to emptiness. Someone else? Questions? Yes?
This is really my first teaching on emptiness, so I don't know.
Okay, so how's it sound? Was it interesting?
Could one say that emptiness is how we perceive things, a perception? How we perceive.
Why don't you say a bit more? I don't quite get what you're saying.
Maybe I don't really know.
No, darling, it's not like that. It's really, it's used in a very simple way, in this technical sense that if you're colourblind, you see something that doesn't exist, then you're living in a fantasy land, aren't you? So we have to sort the problem out so that you get to see the truth. And the first truth you're going to see is the absence of red. Can you hear that simple kind of concept?
Yeah.
Well, then that's a way of talking about. Buddha says we're clinging to an eye. What's your name?
Phyllis?
Phyllis. Buddha says, assuming Phyllis is a regular person like the rest of us, that there's an instinctive grasping deep in the bones of your mind that clings to an inherent eye. Okay, we're not sure what that means, don't worry. And all Buddha's saying is, like seeing red where it doesn't exist, that Phyllis doesn't exist. And so to see the absence of that Phyllis is the way we have to approach this entity. It's just the way they talk, you know. We've got to see the absence of that fantasy Phyllis. Words make any sense?
So how do we then maybe apply that in everyday life?
Okay, good, yes. Perfect point. You got a hubby?
Yes,
Okay, when the hubby's, where is he?
right beside me.
Okay, maybe you fight sometimes, you're like normal people, you might get upset occasionally.
Yeah.
You might get jealous sometimes, a bit angry every now and again after 40 years. Like normal people, okay? Good, join the club. So, you know, what's his name, your hubby?
Jean.
Who?
Jean?
Jean. Okay, when Jean maybe does something that irritates you, you've noticed this happen? Or when Jean is mean, maybe it's, never mind Jean, maybe it's the next door neighbour. And then, you know, and then you start the chat in the head. He this and he that, and it's not fair, and I this and I this. You recognise? Well, the first one is, shut up, Phyllis. That's what you'd say. Shut up, Phyllis, it's all right. There's many causes of this and many conditions. There's no, because the feeling of this little Phyllis in there, this little kind of rock, solid, little poor little Phyllis that's being harmed, isn't it? So just sort of like, give it a break, baby, you're okay. Relax that one, sort of chuck out and smash that little rock. Just give it a bit of space. Even that is a way of applying it. Because the feeling is there's a big rock solid little Phyllis in there, and there's mean rock solid Jean out there who's doing that mean thing to poor Phyllis me. But it's just, another way to say it's just a view, Phyllis. It's just a way of interpreting. If I had more patience, I would say, yes, darling, you're absolutely right. So that straight away proves there's no real solid Phyllis in there. That's a way of seeing it, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said very simply one time, seeing things from a different point of view. That's how you apply it in daily life. When the mind is very tight and very rigid and very panicked, and it's so believing in its own story, we're stuck on our own view. You know, I am right and he is wrong. That's the stubbornness of the concrete mind. Well, loosening the grip of that and seeing it from another point of view, that's applying emptiness in daily life. Do you see? Do you see?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
But going to that, extending that same point, if Jean acts rude to Phyllis the next day,
Yes,
and Phyllis says, that's okay,
that's right.
and then it happens again
Yeah, that's
the
right.
next day,
Yes.
that's Phyllis's and Jean's karma?
It surely is, but the thing is what we have to do with it is the real point. Buddha says everything we experience isn't accidental, isn't random, isn't causeless, isn't coming from God, and isn't only coming from the other person. There's this independent scenario between us, and all the goodness and all the badness is our own stuff that we're all playing out. So what we do with it is the point. So let's say Phyllis is a highly developed being who wants to practice the realizing of emptiness and wants to develop compassion and love for others. Let's say she's got this really ugly husband who's a wacko and mean and awful. If she sees it as her practice, for her that's grist for the mill. Another person who maybe is a victim, they should say, bye-bye baby, I'm leaving. So it depends on where you're at with it. For sure it's karma, but all the good is karma as well. Nothing happens accidentally, what it says, but we tend, because we don't like the bad stuff, we tend to say, why does it happen? Because we love the good stuff, we tend to never bother asking why, we just say, give me more, you know?
Gotcha.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. What else? Folks? Yep.
So, talked about how nothing exists from its own side,
Yeah.
and everything is created by its causes and conditions.
At the first level of dependent origination.
Right, including I and mind and body.
That's right, yeah.
But then, when we talk about Buddha nature,
Yeah.
Buddha mind, that's
Yeah.
omniscient and
Yeah.
pervasive,
Yes,
pervades all
universe,
the
all
universe.
loving, all
This
compassionate.
seems like more absolute and
No.
exists from its own
No,
side.
not those words. No. Doesn't-
Okay.
Okay, so I forget your name all the time.
One time,
One time.
yeah.
Okay. Huh?
One time.
Spell it.
Wontake.
One time. Thank
Yes,
you, one
thank
time. So listen, okay, is one time a sentient being?
Yeah.
One time possesses a mind.
Right.
Is one time got delusions in his mind
Yes.
at the moment? But woodchuck also possesses the potential to be free of delusions, would you agree?
Right.
So eventually, as you progress on this path, you'll get rid of more delusions, and there'll eventually be none left, will there? And you'll develop all the goodness. Well, what will that mind be called then?
Omniscient.
Omniscient mind, won't it? So then that's the result of causes and conditions, isn't it?
Okay.
So how can it be absolute and self-existent? It's not. It's just like everything else. It's the result of causes and conditions, isn't it? Isn't it?
But then that mind doesn't
When it's enlightened.
change?
It changes from moment to moment in its nature, but not change in the sense of changing back into suffering.
Right.
That's
my
the
question.
major point that Buddha makes.
Okay.
That's where he talks about the Four Noble Truths. The second Noble Truth is the suffering of change, which means when all the good things happen, we believe that the cake is the cause of it. So I keep shoving the cake in, waiting for happiness. But we all know that if I keep eating it, it'll turn into suffering. We know that. So, but our trouble is, the only way we know how to trigger a happy feeling is by getting cakes and friends and nice things, isn't it?
Right.
You get my point?
Yeah.
But the Buddha's, you see, we should understand the Four Noble Truths. When he talks about this second Noble Truth, it sounds very depressing, that what we call happiness is really a subtle level of suffering. But we've got to see it in reference to his third Noble Truth, which is when he talks about the happiness that all minds are capable of achieving, which is the happiness, which is the freedom from suffering. So when you've achieved that Buddha, forget about even Buddha, but even earlier than that, when you've achieved your Buddha mind, because you've removed even the subtlest seed of all suffering, then your mind can only be blissfully happy. And it can never ever change into suffering. But the subtle level of impermanence is that it's changing from moment to moment. But the change we think about is changing from happiness to suffering, happiness to suffering. That change, that's not possible because it's no longer the causes of suffering there. But it's in its nature subtle impermanence. Subtle impermanence is the very fact that it's changing from moment to moment. But happiness is always there, constant. You see?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
What else? It's 11 o'clock. 12 o'clock?
12 o'clock.
Yes, darling, tell me.
So going back to the marriage question, so you're in your marriage and you decide that you want to use your angry husband as an opportunity for practice. Thinking about what you were saying before about you ask yourself, well, what can I do about it with compassion?
That's right, yes.
So would you do the same thing in a human
Of course you would.
relationship?
Exactly, no difference. Exactly the same. And this is a really helpful way to put it. If you bring it all down to these two wings of the bird, you think about this. So all the wisdom wing work in Buddhist view is all this work we're discussing and looking into how things exist in your own mind and karma and sorting your own self out. We're not even discussing compassion here. This is like the retreat mode. Deal with your own junk. Sort yourself out. Become this amazing person who's free of all the neuroses and delusions, who's blissfully content and happy. Now you can afford to hang out with sentient beings and try to help them because you've got a bit of wisdom. You agree with me? Mm-hmm. So the compassion, so if you think about it in daily life, this is how I try to think myself, there's only ever really two reasons to do anything in life. One is, if you're in that relationship, let's say, with the mean hubby. So, depending on where you're at, let's say you think, is it useful for me to be in this relationship? And that means, will it help me develop my qualities? Will it help me become less angry and less jealous and less neurotic? You understand? Which is the wisdom wing. And if the answer is yes, and you're capable of it, then that's a good relationship. Mm-hmm. Now, the higher one, the more advanced, is assuming you've done the work on yourself, and now you know there's some karma between you and your husband, Fred, and you see he's a wacko, an alcoholic or something, but you think, is it beneficial for him, truly, in the long term, if I stay in this relationship? Mm. Or, if I go? Then you do whichever one you know is right for his sake. So, the first one has to be for our own sake. Because we can't be so advanced in our others' sake. But when you're more prepared and you're really stable in your own wisdom and your own contentedness, you can then really do it for others' sake. But most of us, it's for both. We can see it's your own practice as much as for his sake. I mean, there's a friend of mine who's a Buddhist, and she happens to have a husband who's an alcoholic, kind of a quiet alcoholic, has been for years. He doesn't harm anybody but himself. He sits at home and goes to sleep, before he goes to sleep, and just drinks himself stupid. So he's not much fun to be around, obviously. But she made a decision years ago that it was right for her to stay in that relationship, both for her sake and his. So she's a happy person. Instead of the one that we normally have is, he shouldn't be alcoholic, how dare he be alcoholic, he only is not alcoholic, you talk about it to everybody else, to the aunties in the front, there's drama and rubbish, you get change, he doesn't change, you get upset and angry, look at the dramas, That's insanity. We don't want that. So it's either it's going to be help that relationship or that job. Or even a friend. It helps you become more patient, less attached, less angry. Hey, baby, that's already intense. But even more if it's benefit for others. Amazing. We've got to know where we're at. Because if the person, if the person who's the victim in a relationship, their best choice is I better go. But most people don't. That's why they all murder each other. Sit there living together with the same person for 30 years, hating them, in the same bed, hating them, and not making a decision. I find that total insanity. I think, how can you live like this? But people do, because we don't even know what you think yourself. I shouldn't do this, I wouldn't do this, if only I shouldn't do, I shouldn't get divorced. And Mummy says all the internalised rubbish we have, we don't even know what we think ourselves. So this is huge, this wisdom wing is huge. Having the courage to know what I think and then making valid choices according to my capacity. We don't make it practice, we just make it more hell, more torture. All right, that'll do. Right, it? Enough food for thought for today? Okay. Yes, darling.
Just wanted to ask you if you could share with us your trip to Burma recently. Any thought on that?
Okay. Yeah, about 25 of us went to Burma. I'd never been before. It was wonderful. I mean, 90%, it seems like all the people are sweetest people, it seems like. Well, I didn't see some of those fundamentalist Buddhists up on near the border and wherever it was up on the left-hand corner there, hating the Muslims. What can you do? And that's just, not many people hear about that in Burma. And they say it's mainly race-based, anyway, not religion-based, it's race-based. Because there's this sort of tension between Muslims and Burmese over the centuries. What's that part? Right by the border on the left. There's a Muslim country just there. You reading the news lately about the Burmese monks? They're making the big deal about the monks, which is unfortunate, but it's mainly race, they say. Never mind all that. I didn't see any of that. But the people were incredibly sweet, incredibly kind, incredibly devoted, And everywhere was just these gold pagodas. I mean, everywhere was just covered in gold. I couldn't believe these places. There's flooded. There's a whole area where there's now, so now, you're not allowed to pull buildings down. It's just this, every second step there's a monastery and a pagoda. We went to these big nunnery. Huge number of nuns there, so many nuns, all studying it seems, and many, many monks, everywhere you go. So it really does seem to suffuse the country, It's very interesting. Very, very nice, very special. Yeah. And there's no, it's still like, there's no, you go to buy a chocolate bar, you won't find a chocolate bar, you're going to find all their cute little candies they make with rice and, sweet things with fruit and there's no such thing as you don't see Coca-Cola. It's not like in India where you see billions of Coca-Cola signs pervading the country and billions of, internet things. You just hardly see any of that in Burma still. It seems like so pure still. It won't be long, I suppose. It's very nice to be there. Very lovely people. But this year I'm not going, the next year I've decided I'm going to go to, there's a poster out there, we were supposed to have postcards, but they didn't do them. I'm leading another pilgrimage to India and Nepal, to all the holy places of the Buddha, which I find very special, to go where the Buddha put his holy feet. We start in Kathmandu, we go to Kopan Monastery, we do a 3 or 4 day retreat there, which is very special. It's Lama's Monastery, Lama Monastery. And then we go to a few places in Nepal, very special, holy places. Then we take a bus and we go to India, and we spend 2 weeks in India, going to first Shravasti, which is where Buddha spent all his rains retreats. And it's very isolated. Most tourists never go there. You never go there on your own. There's no infrastructure, But it's just these places are so special where the Buddha used to be, and the Indian government really takes care of these beautiful oases. And this lovely place with these ruins of the houses where Buddha and his disciples for like 25 years spent their rainy season retreats. It's very special, so special. Lama always says people who meditate can meditate really easily there. Really feels blessed. They say one of the main criteria for a place to choose to meditate is where other people have meditated, the holy beings have been there. So Kopan Monastery, where we go, Lama's Monastery, I never forget, our wonderful friend, dear friend, Renee, Venerable Renee, a Swiss monk who's a meditator, a professional meditator for like 35 years. He told me about, I interviewed him in Mandalay, my first issue of Mandalay when I edited in the 90s. And we interviewed him about his 18-month retreat, and many long retreats, in our centre in Spain called Urselling, which was where Lama Yeshe was born. Lama Yeshe's reincarnation was born, Lama Ursa, who's now about mid-30, Anyway, Rene did a retreat there. He said he knew he was doing single point of concentration. He said he knew he couldn't get his mind get more subtle there because it was just the conditions. He said your mind gets very, very sensitive when you're meditating on this concentration. And even a wind slightly changing, it will disturb the mind, And even though it's been very blessed, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was there. He named it Ursa. Anyway, Rene said, I interviewed him at Kopan Monastery, which is very busy. It's in the valley. Down in the valley, all the talking and the Hindu songs and the dogs barking and the people. It's really quite noisy. But Kopan Monastery is said to be so blessed, And he said his mind got more subtle, more easily at Kopan Monastery. So we do a retreat there first, 3 or 4 days, and it's so special. Many people say they just went home after those 3 days and be quite content. It's a very special place.
When is that?
This is October. There's a poster out there. We've got to get postcards. Poster out there, you can grab one and have a look at the information. It's called Chasing Buddha. No, not called Chasing. Yes, it's called Chasing Buddha. No, it's not. It's called Dharma Journeys. Dharma Journeys. And it's in October. And I'll be leading it. It's about three and a bit weeks. So then we go to Sravasti. We spend a couple of days at each place. We always do meditation there. We do practices. People love it. Many people who aren't Buddhists go and they just say that changes their life. Everybody has special dreams, special meditation. It's so special. Then we drive, have our own bus. I think these bus drivers all come from a special bus driver school. They're all the same. They're amazing. They drive for like 15 hours without blinking. They always have these immaculate iron shirts, this neat hair. They must have a special race, I think, of these bus drivers. They're incredible. They drive amazingly in these great big buses on these dreadful roads, They're just wonderful people, these bus drivers. So we have the same bus, and you put our furniture, our bags in the back, and you relax. We have a microphone, we have teachings, people sleep, we meditate. It's very nice on the buses. Then we go to where Buddha passed away, Kushinagar. 2 places there that's really special. One stupa that's really all just sort of old and broken, but it's very holy, very special, where he was cremated. I love that place. We do prayers and practices at each place. Then we go to, by now it's about halfway through, we get to Varanasi. Then we hang out and stay in a posh hotel. All the hotels are very nice. It's a combination of basic India and nice hotels and very delicious food. So we stay in Varanasi and hang around there. People go shopping, buy silk. And then we go down to the Ganges and we go to the Hindu things and see the priests doing their trips and making offerings on the river, and the Ghats. And then we go to Sarnath, which is near there, where Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, and we do special stuff there. And then we drive to Bodh Gaya, which is where we end up, where Buddha became enlightened. We stay at Rouge Institute, the FPMT Centre, which is beautiful, beautiful trees, lovely oasis. We stay for a few days there. We go to the tree every day, the Bodhi tree, and do meditations and practices there. And then we drive one day, 4 hours away to Vajra Peak, one of my favourites, where we go to Heart Sutra and walk up there and do practices. The Bodhisattvas in the sky, no doubt. And then we go to Nalanda Monastery, the ruins of Nalanda Monastery. There's an amazing monastery where 10,000 monks studied, in the 5th, 6th, 7th centuries. And then we go back to, we drive to Kathmandu, drive to Nepal, get the plane, go back to Kathmandu, hang out at the Hyatt a couple more days, a gorgeous hotel, and then we go home. The poster's out there. October. That was an advertisement. And all the profit. Effie, who runs these, has been for years. She's done so many for me. All the profit goes to, I have a thing called the Bodhicitta Trust, which supports different activities. So all the profit goes to that. There you go. Posters out there, or you can go online. It's online now, I think. You can register or book up and talk to Effie and ask questions. All right. Cheers.
Thank you.
2 hours, non-stop, all these thoughts, all these seeds we planted, how marvellous we think. We might remember most of the thoughts, but we put all these thoughts in our mind. Every thought counts. Every thought is a karmic seed. So we think maybe nourish these from this moment forward. Whether we become a Buddhist or not, I don't mind, that's your business. But keep working on our minds. Keep developing our amazing potential. Keep benefiting others. This is the bottom line. Wisdom and compassion. No matter how long it takes. Jamchur sem chogrin poche ma ke param ke gyuchi ke pa nyam pa me pa yang gong ne gong du kava sho